Hello everyone, welcome to the weekly show H panel. The H panel starts now. Okay, today we are full house in the panel, which is great. We'll be talking about Ethiopia's state of foreign affairs through Abiy Ahmed's lens. Before we go to the main topic, as usual, we will go through the panelists in terms of what stood out for them. Professor Eskel, what stood out for you this week?
What stood out for me this week is the shift in the rhetoric and probably even in practice in the prosecution of the war in Ethiopia. What I saw is that with regard to the Tigray war, every sign points to the government tilting towards a negotiated settlement to me. For now, as we will see probably in talking about the leaked document, that international pressure externally, economic pressure internally, and political disagreements and fragmentation within the country has forced the hand of the Ethiopian government to look towards a negotiated settlement rather than continuing the war, and many signs and pronouncements from the government speak to that the government has come to an understanding or realization that the war in Tigray is unwinnable, that the government cannot continue to send human waves and hope that Tigray would be exhaust its firepower and then submit. External pressure and internal pressure has brought the Ethiopian government to that realization that the war in the northern Tigray, is unwinnable, but they will continue to put pressure on Tigray by using proxy forces from the Amhara and the Afar region, but they're not going to enter Tigray, hoping that this war is going to be decided militarily. That it looks like the Ethiopian government had given up on that. But it has shifted its focus somewhere else. Instead, deciding that they're going to seek a negotiated settlement in the Tigray war, the war has now focused to Oromia. They've shifted it to Oromia. The focus of the next war is now Oromia. Why would I say that? The Ethiopian government has sent to Western Oromia, by its own admission, by the government's own reporting through its own government-controlled media, that they have sent 4 different forces to the Western Oromia. That is, 2 different forces from the federal government. That is the Ethiopian National Defense Forces, and then also the federal force to Oromia, to Western Oromia, to Wallagga to be specific. And then there is the regional government forces, the special forces, and the Oromia police. These 2 separate forces are now swarming Wallagga. There are reports that the Air Force had also built drone, an aerodrome that is capable for the drone to land and take off and attack Oromo Liberation Army in that region, especially in the Kellam Wallagga region, where the government thinks that the training ground and the fertile ground for the OLA to succeed is Kellam Wallagga. So they would bomb aerial bombing from bases in Asosa. So the war has shifted to um, to Western Ethiopia. The Ethiopian National Defense Forces. I just said it's one force, but there are two divisions there. One mechanized and one infantry had been sent to Western Oromia. On the other hand, there are also Oromo or Oromo Liberation Army activities in eastern Ethiopia, and Fano forces and their political consigliere were also sent to Jijiga, not to do anything else, but to foment trouble. Send Fano forces to Jijiga and then attack Oromia from the east. So basically, the war in the north have now shifted to the south, and that's what stood out for me.
Great. Thank you. Faisal, what stood out for you?
Yeah, thank you very much. I just like to join actually what Eskiel already started, in the sense that Prime Minister Abiy's foreign policy and international uh, policy is interlinked with how he's going to manage the internal crisis. So basically, we can say there is the real international uh, approach or standing that the Prime Minister and his government would like to take, and the hidden and the real one that they implement in Ethiopia. The facade is the one that they show the world that yes, we have heard you, that we understand that war in Tigray and in Oromia is not good for the country. Therefore, we would like to resolve that in a peaceful way. That's really the message that they are sending. All the little meek actions that the government is taking is to show the world that they are doing a change. However, when I read the document, despite the fact that it's a badly written and hastily organized document, it really shows how recalcitrant Abiy would like to be with international war. In the sense that he is everything that happened in the last year and a half. The Ethiopian government would like to outsource and blame somebody else. They're blaming the United States government for the first time, very sadly, to say that it was pro TPLF and the US government was trying to help TPLF. They are blaming the Western media to say that all these things that we have heard and covered was just a fabrication of the Western media, which, according to the report, is known to always work for the US. And then they will go deep into how they would like to conclude this war. And as Kiel was indicating, I think, although you can see how tired the government is, but for consumption, the report says that we will finish up with TPLF. Basically, there is not going to be a TPLF that they will spare. They also stand very firm on the fact that the US government is an imperialist government. Therefore, they will not change their course with China and the rest. Actually, the report praises Russia, and it also shows how Russia has handled correctly the issues that it faced in Eastern, former Soviet when there were issues. So, from international point of view, although they would like to brush up the facade that they have, but the report that comes out to the public is one that sends its very negative message to the West. So there is contradiction between rapprochement with the West and how the report reads. That's what came for me. I think all this is, in my opinion, related to how they would like to handle the internal issue, to say that we will not compromise on our ideology and our standing with TPLF or OLA. With that, as Skian said, I think they seem to feel like the North and Tigray can be contained either through the blockade, to the starvation, and what have you, but now to put an army military muscle on Oromia. And as Skian said, definitely, and we can go into that deeper, but there seems to be the two front against the Oromo region, the Walaga and the West, and this Eastern, which is really currently evolving, which is taking a shape. So basically, in addition to the famine that Eastern Oromia experiences along with the Somali region, there seems to be this added factor to utilize not only Fano coming from up north, but the growing Fano movement in the settlers that are all the way from, I would say, Adama down to Jigjiga. That is the big arm and the hand that the Menelik Brigade leader is, along with Mustafa Omar of Somali region, are proposing. This is today. This group, including Naam Zaleke and Tamanye Bayane, are in Jigjiga, hosted by the president of the Somali region. And basically, in the Facebook write-up that they put, they said we went down there to strategize. And prior to this Jigjiga visit was another meeting that Mustafa Umar and Naam Zaleke took in Addis Ababa, which again was billed as the two sides strategizing. Now, it was not clear what they're strategizing until the Kush Media Network, which covers Oromia region, got a lot of concrete information which we can talk after Yosef jumps in. But that is the shaping of the Eastern Front that the Ethiopian government would like now to organize against the Oromo Liberation Army.
Thank you. And I just want to play the man on the right side of Tamai is an assistant professor at Jigjiga University, and he recently said this about criminalizing the word Tigray. And maybe it's part of the strategy that they are cooking up in terms of Ola as well.
በደረሰብን ጥፋት ከተሸበበ you're a loser ጦርነቱን ተሸንፈሃል ለሺህ ዓመታት አስበ ይሄን ትውልድ ማሸነፍ ካልቻልክ ፐርማነንትሊ ኒውትራላይዝ ማድረግ ካልተቻለ ለሀገር ለህዝቦቻችን ድጋሚ አደጋ በማይሆንበት ልክ እንዲቃጅ ካልተደረገ በጣም አደገኛ ስለሆነ አስተሳሰቡን ለማሸነፍ ደግሞ በጣም ብዙ ስራዎች መሰራት ይኖርባቸዋል በጣም ከፍተኛ ስራዎች ኢቭን ትግራይ የሚባለው ለምሳሌ የናይጄሪያ መንግስት በቢያፍራና ትግራይን በለፈው ስንሰራ ያላነሳነው ነገር ነበር ለምሳሌ መጨረሻ ላይ ቢያፍራ የሚባል ነገር ወንጀል ነው የተደረገው ናይጄሪያ ላይ ቢያፍራ የሚለውን ቃል በራሱ መጠቀም ወንጀል ነው ሞስት ፕሮባብሊ የኢትዮጵያ መንግስት ትግራይ የሚለውን ቃል እንኳን ክሪሚናላይዝ ሊያደርገው ይችላል ብዬ ነው የምፈራው ምክንያቱም የደረሰው ጥፋት እንደው ዝም ብለን ይሄንን ስም ያሽሞነሞንን ይዘን የምንቀጥልበትን ሁኔታ የሚፈቅድም ስላልሆነ ማለት ምናልባት ወደ 4-5 ክልልነትና በዞን አስተዳደርነት የሚዋቀርበትን ሁኔታ ፈልጎ ይሄንን የክራይም ኢንተርፕራይዝ የሆነ ክልል ፐርማነንትሊ ከነስያሜው ከኖሜንክላቸሩ ሳይቀር ሪቪዚት ማድረግ ስለሚያስፈልግ ይሄን ሰጀስት ለማድረግ ያህል ነው እና አንተ ያነሳቸው
Yosef,
Okay.
what stood out for you this week?
All right. Okay. Let me say a few words, in regard to the war in the north. I'm not so sure as Hizkiel that it will eventually be resolved through negotiation. It seems to me that the war does not only depend on Ethiopia, but also on Tigray. What Ethiopia has done so far, the strategy of Ethiopia has done so far is that there is Eritrea, Amhara, and Afar alliance. This alliance is what's causing the biggest problem right now. Eritrea has opened many training camps in Afar and Amhara area. The western Tigray remains intact in the hands of, Ethiopian and Eritrean and Amhara troops. They meant to keep that intact. They don't want to have to see Tigray getting any corridor to Sudan. In addition to that, no medical or food aid is supposed to enter into Tigray, at least not insignificant amount. So if that is the case, it means that the siege of Tigray is continuing. If the siege of Tigray continues this way, then it doesn't necessarily depend on Ethiopia to start the war. The war could be started from Tigray. So we have to look at that. I'm not totally discounting what Professor Hitzkiel has been saying, but there is a lot to be cleared before we come into that conclusion. But let me go back to what stood out for me for last week. One thing that I have seen was that the flurry of activities in the region, almost, I mean, in almost all cases, it has been intense flurry in the region. Some of that has to do with the geopolitical consequences of the Tigray war, but not necessarily all of them. Let me mention few of them. It has to do entirely with the region itself. The first one that we have seen is the US-led naval exercise, a massive one, in the Red Sea. And we see this tripartite alliance emerging between Gulf states, Israel, and the US. Now, this is mainly pointed at against Iran and Yemen. But think about this, if the US is to maintain this alliance in between, especially in between the Gulf states and Israel, to what extent is it willing to do? So, for example, let me ask this question. Would it allow the UAE to do whatever it wants to do in the region in order to keep this alliance between Israel and the Gulf states? So UAE is a very, what would I call? It's a very skillful in managing, in maneuvering these alliances. And that is what it has been doing in that area. The second thing that we have seen was that the UAE, I think it was yesterday, has turned back to Asab in full force. Up to now, the flights of UAE cargoes have been from the Middle East to inside Ethiopia. But now, for the first time after months, it's coming back to Asab. And is it what is it for? Is it preparing, for example, to help Eritrea in its war against Tigray? Since Eritrea, if we factor out, for example, the federal forces, one of the things that the Eritreans has been complaining was that they don't have drones to support them in the ground war. So is that where it's leading to? We don't know. The third one is today what happened in Somaliland in its attempt to nationhood, to be accepted by the international community. It is being both manipulated and it's also manipulating others. In today's news, it offers the United States port and air bases. Now, if you remember a week ago, Ethiopia also was seen, was willing to appoint or send a full ambassador to Somaliland. Things that, I mean, people were concerned. Why would it wanna do that? Why wanna it offend Somalia? But again, the hands of UAE. We are seeing again the hands of UAE. UAE is doing its work against Djibouti, precisely because Djibouti has kicked it out from there. It was, I think it was a company, a UAE company that was supposed to manage the port of Djibouti, but when it was kicked out, it was looking in that area for the Berbera, Zayla, and it's part of that process that is happening in that area. So again, we are seeing, the hands of UAE, the US, the Somaliland trying to attract the US base. What better way could it have to legitimize itself as a nation? So we are seeing all of this over there, and then again, what is Israel doing in all of this? Remember, Israel also has given drones to Ethiopia, although they are not attack drones, they are espionage drones. Now, when it comes to to the Arab cause. The UAE remains committed also to the Arab cause. When it comes to the Nile Valley, it always will side with Egypt against Ethiopia. So, for Egypt, the shortest cut for for all its demands to be met in regard to the Nile, it would be to allow Israel to get access to the Nile waters. Not necessarily. I mean, Egypt would profit twice. It would sell the water, but at the same time, it would make sure that the US will be behind it. If Israel is being involved in this in the deal, this deal, then it will make sure that the US will remain behind it. So all of this, I see in all of this the hands of UAE that is throughout the region, working throughout the region. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. With that, I think we can jump into our topic of the day. So the state of foreign affairs of Ethiopia. Our starting point for that topic is the recently leaked strategy. So it's a re-engagement strategy to rekindle the foreign relations with nations in the West and international institutions that has grown cold as the consequence of the conflict that has occurred in Ethiopia. A long title, but a short title is the re-engagement strategy, and released January this year, and over 50 pages, and it's from the Office of Advisor to the Minister. So, gentlemen, you had a chance to go through that, and we can use that as a starting material and expand in terms of what your insight is as to where the state of the foreign affairs of Ethiopia is. This time, maybe I start with Faisal.
Thank you very much. I think I touched some of those issues, and basically, when I started reading this report, my expectation was to see a pathway from the Ethiopian side to get out of the international, if you will, quagmire that it was before President Biden spoke with Prime Minister Abiy. But the more I read the report, as you said, 51 pages, the more I realized that it's a whining document. All it is really listing, in my opinion, is a sort of victim kind of mentality to say that the West in general, and particularly the United States of America, has done wrong to us. I mean, professionals who have written this report must be scratching their head now when more people read. For them, for example, to say that the United States was helping and rooting for TPLF. I mean, with all the followings that I have done regarding the conflict between Addis Ababa and Mekelle, if any, I think the US was initially giving carte blanche to the Ethiopian government to go ahead. If you remember, before the Biden took over the office, the previous ambassador in Addis Ababa literally was giving the green light for the Ethiopian government to go ahead and hit TPLF. Also, I think the entire analysis that really just comes from an ignorant point of view to say that Western media was in cahoots with the US government to really do damage to Prime Minister Abiy is a little bit, in my opinion, charlatan, if you will. Because most of the time, the narrative that the press in the West submits is simply a product of following where the news is. So newsmakers and newsmaking events capture their attention. So the Ethiopian government couldn't really disentangle between the foreign policy challenge that it faced as a result of losing its Western friends and the fact that 5 million people, of which close to 1 million people were starving and blockaded and denied medicine and food. the very fact that Western media would go out and cover those newsmaking events appears to the Ethiopian government something that was against them. So it is, there is no path that really I saw the report giving to Prime Minister Abiy's team and a way forward in the sense that they're not really showing, for instance, they don't show in that report how they will do with the science. They still stick with the science. They stand by what he has not done. For instance, when they talk about Isaiah's role in the massacre of the people of Tigray, they completely absolve him from that. The report even doesn't show some sort of appreciation of the human rights report, which really, in a way, served a face saving for the Ethiopian government. So, as I said, it's a whining report. It doesn't really unravel new things that we expected. It doesn't also give a new light to the journey that the Ethiopian Foreign Ministry would be traveling. All the more when you read that report and then you come back and see what is happening in Addis Ababa, such as the composition of the new commission, which is handpicked by the government, the entire recommendation or expectation of the West, which was that they will see a genuine mediation and reconciliation, is really out of the window. So just to conclude, the report is a rehash of the complaints that we have been seeing in the social media. Actually, it really is more of the social media reportage and more of the social media complaints and outcry that we have heard from the normal movement than anything. It is not a report that seasoned professional diplomatic experienced people will write. It's a shame and it's a sham report, in my opinion.
Thank you, Faisal. Professor Ezekiel?
I'll come back to the issue of the state of Ethiopia's foreign policy, which is the topic of our discussion later on. Why we have this kind of document leaked to the public. But simply it's 51 pages, so it's very difficult to go through it. So I would just start with the point of departure, which character is really strewn out the document. That number one, it begins by acknowledging. There is an acknowledgement here that the state of Ethiopia's foreign policy is in shambles. It says that. That is the first point of departure, that it says after November 23, 2020, when the Ethiopian government entered Tigray, that because of the law enforcement, even though that is an idea that the New York Times has completely blown out of the water, that was not the case. Even though that was the case, it still maintains this notion that the Ethiopian government entered Tigray to punish them for attacking the Northern Command. And what it says, what it acknowledges, is that because of that, Ethiopia had been confronted with great challenges in the diplomatic arena. Everything that they're doing has not been accepted, particularly in the West. The Western countries, I don't know how many times the Western countries have been, the US is 50, but Western countries, how many times they've said it, I don't know. They've named it US 50 times, but West simply means the United States and European Union, and they say that they have a great challenge. They say that they have a lot of work to do to repair Ethiopia's image and its standing in the eyes of the world. That is an acknowledgement. They acknowledge the diplomacy is not working. Then it's delusion. What I see is the delusion that Ethiopia went in there for law enforcement, went into Tigray for law enforcement, that Ethiopia left after declaring humanitarian ceasefire in order to allow for peaceful negotiations to take place. And of course, the farmers in Tigray to plant their seeds before the rain came down. And that after that, the Tigrayan forces, or the terrorist Tigrayan forces, took advantage of that and went into Afar and Amhara region. I mean, it's still maintaining that delusion, that they were not defeated in Tigray. They did not lose in Tigray. They did not lose the entire Ethiopian National Defense Forces in Tigray, in the Tigray war. That they did not lose all kinds of military arsenals that they have in Tigray. They're still saying it's known that it's a law enforcement operation. So the delusion is there as well. The other is the denial. The denial is still going on, that the international community had been accusing the Ethiopian government and the Eritrean army, they say, interestingly. They accuse them for crimes that apparently they haven't committed. That they had not killed innocent people in Tigray. Genocide had not happened in Tigray. Ethnic cleansing did not happen in Tigray. All of those reportings by international media, international rights organizations, and even the human rights report that they jointly, the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission and the United Nations Human Rights Commission, jointly, the finding in that, even in that flawed document, did not happen. The Ethiopian government was simply accused by the United States government that is biased, that is standing with the Tigray word. So they acknowledge it's in shambles, but it's still delusional, it's still denial. But at the end of the day, it shows to something really deeply troubling, that Ethiopia does not have a coherent foreign policy. This is not a document drafted by professionals. It is attributed to the advisor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. I don't think that's the case. This was probably cooked and concocted in the Prime Minister's office by Prosperity Party political operatives. That is what it reflects, the infantile approach to foreign policy, the lack of statecraft. So I just wanted to recommend to them what one of the early diplomats of Ethiopia under the emperor translated, Harold Nicholson's book, Diplomacy. That was translated some 50, 60 years ago by Mr. Emmanuel Abraham. These people who drafted this did not get a copy of that book, if it's right in Amharic. It's an infantile approach to foreign policy, but we'll come back later on to the details of it and what this is pointing out.
Thank you, Professor Scale. Yusuf, you will take on Europe, I guess. So pointing about number of mentions, Europe, either at European countries or EU, was mentioned more than 110 times in the document. So, Yusuf, you are muted, I guess.
Oh, that's right. Okay. When it comes to Europe, we know that they have done little or nothing in regard to sanctioning or punishing Ethiopia in the genocide. And more importantly, to me, is that what they have allowed the Abiy government to get away with. That's another point. And then the third point is their readiness to go back to Ethiopia as business as usual, in fact, lately it was France, before it was Germany, that are rushing to participate in the farcical national dialogue to be conducted in Addis Ababa. So you could see the irresponsibility of Europe in all of this. But to me, to go back to the document itself, it has been called reckless, irresponsible, childish, foolish, incompetent, outlandish, short-sighted by many commentators. We can call it this diplomatic excesses, in the document. But to me, I don't think they were delusional or they didn't know what they were saying. This document was meant to be among themselves. It's amateur, no doubt about it. But they knew exactly. For example, when they talked about, the crimes committed by others, by TDF, but not by themselves, they know exactly what they were talking about. So the focus instead should be on what are they trying to, what are they aiming to do. If I am to summarize it, exactly, if I am to give it a title for the document, I would say it's appearance of a reality. What they were saying was that we could appear to be doing all the concerns that the West has raised, all the concerns that the West has raised, that the West has demanded of us, like, so, for example, providing humanitarian aid or investigating the humanitarian crimes or conducting a national dialogue. We should appear to be doing all of that without really doing it. That's the crux of the matter. That's you could sum up the diplomacy that they are aiming to do is that one. Now, has that diplomacy been sufficient so far, for Ethiopia up to this now? Yes. I think it has been successfully done by Ethiopia up to this now. The question that we have to ask is, what kind of job is it? Is this diplomatic maneuverings, this appearance of a reality? What kind of goal was it supposed to meet? The goal from the beginning has been clear. It is to buy enough time. I will underline that again. To buy enough time so that the genocidal war against Tigray will be accomplished to its final end. This has been, this and only this has been, they might change it, now that they have come up with different, with negotiations and stuff like that. But up to now, it has been, Ethiopia's goal has been how to achieve that task, that genocidal task. Has the diplomatic maneuverings of Ethiopia served it well in doing that? Yes. Let me mention a few of them. First and foremost, it has been getting away with nothing less than genocide. A genocide that is still raging on in Tigray. It hasn't stopped yet. In fact, it's accelerating. Second, Abiy, the genocider himself, has successfully convinced the world that there is no alternative to him. Again, we have seen part of the reason why the TDF was made to retreat from the gates of Addis Ababa was precisely because of that. Third, Abiy has successfully managed to create an alliance of foreign nations that even don't see eye to eye with one another. The UAE, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Iran, and Israel. That has been done. That to me is a diplomatic feat. Another one, it has successfully lobbied or at least convinced Antonio Guterres, the UN chief himself, to do its own bidding up to now. All the preemptive actions that Ethiopia has taken, all the appearance over the reality actions that Ethiopia has taken up to now has been through the collaboration of Antonio Guterres. For example, the Joint Investigation Commission, that is appearance over reality. It was quickly adapted by Guterres. Sending the AU and Obasanjo, it has been, for example, Ethiopia's preference. That has been also blessed by Guterres. So you see, every one of them, every one of those actions has been, they have been successful in having Antonio Guterres on their side. Another one is through the help of Russia and China and India. They have successfully managed to prevent any kind of meaningful action from being taken by the Security Council. It has another one is it has successfully turned AU, the African Union, into a cheerleader, the organization that has notoriously blessed the law and order mantra of Abiy government. The last one is it's the mockery of Pan-Africanism. It has done that too has been to some extent successful in the goal it has set out to do. It has primarily it has encouraged the nations that have been helping it, Russia, China, UAE, Turkey, to say that all the Africans, since all the Africans are behind us, we don't have to fear. We could go ahead and continue our help to Ethiopia. And now the last one, it has come up with another farce, which is the national dialogue, which I have mentioned it before. That farcical national dialogue is already being accepted by what? By nations such as Germany and France, who are rushing to Addis Ababa to join that meeting. So in all, Ethiopia's diplomatic maneuverings of appearance versus reality have been very successful.
Ketacho, if I jump in, I think we need to differentiate between what we Yosef call is Abiy's success in the international arena and the mystique and weight that naturally comes with being a sovereign nation or a sovereign country. For Ethiopia to always have a bigger muscle than it is counter, parts such as TDF or OLA, it's just normal. For instance, the TDF or OLA cannot come and debate at the General Assembly and make their cases. It just is not open for them. Will not open unless they capture the political seat at Aret Kilo. So I think comparing, apple with orange is a little bit here what I see. I think.
Why don't you take the Darfur case as an example?
Go ahead.
No, take the Darfur case as an example. Darfur, TDF, and Sudan and Ethiopia. The Darfur case, the United Nations were convinced at that time, the TDF doesn't do its own bidding, nor did the Darfur case. But the Chinese and the Russians have been, so it's not simply comparing. So go ahead.
No, I thought we made a very good presentation earlier in this, that the interest that, for example, China has in Ethiopia is deeper at this point in time than it has in any other African country. The level of debt, how China has established its roots in Ethiopia, the anchor, and also for worse or good, Ethiopia is a huge anchor country for those countries that are competing in the international arena. I'm just saying that I think, of course, military emphasis on TDF or OLA and those people are one thing, but their access to international forum is a different thing. They don't have that. So when it comes to, if you even want to use the word fooling or listening or being listened, you cannot compare those with a sitting government that tells the world we are ready to change the direction of war. We are ready to talk peace. I think the world would gravitate, in my opinion, to the country that has that sovereignty at hand. A very good example. You have seen in the last 30 years, 20 years, the Somali government not doing much, but the world and the West in particular doesn't listen to the opposition. They listen to the government that holds the Villa Somalia chair. Farmacho is a good example. He ran over his 4 year that was mandated in the constitution. But when it comes to the international world and especially the West, after so many discussions, they always gravitate toward deciding, quote unquote, the person who has the sovereign seat. And Ethiopia is not unique to that. I think in some areas, gullible Westerners bought the idea that the war is stopping, Abiy is shifting direction, and therefore he can work with them. those of us who are insiders who can read the tea leaves very carefully are now saying that whatever Abiy promised to the West is just a pipe dream and it's not there. We know that. The question is, and I think I made this point some time ago in this discussion, I don't think groups like Ola or TDF or that for that matter, other groups that are seeking their self-determination, in my opinion and my experience in the Horn of Africa, will never get a sympathetic eye from the sitting big countries and nations such as the EU or for that matter, the United States. Eritrea is a good example. When there was a debate whether the Ethiopian government was using a napalm to burn the ground, there wasn't much of an outcry. When Western Somali Liberation was fighting against Ethiopia, most of the West actually jumped to help Ethiopia while Russia was there. And, so we can go on and on. I think the ground is not here leveled. There is always a muscle that the government has that they can switch sides and still get the blessing of this nation. It's just one last thing. I think with the international relations that Ethiopia is having within the region, vis-a-vis Somalia, it is really a mess. As I think was it you, Yosef, or Skial, who mentioned that. On the one hand, Ethiopia is bidding itself as the giant peacemaking big brother that's bringing everybody together. But in the same token, more and more Somalis see Ethiopia as really the most dangerous player in the Horn of Africa. A very good example, they are in bed with Farmacho, but they are pulling the carpet under his feet, as you said, when they double deal with the question of Somaliland. So I think there is a level of, in my opinion, there is a level of the Ethiopian foreign diplomacy community not understanding how they could have done a 10-page white paper that really shows a pathway to get out of this quagmire. We know that they want to defeat TPLF or TDF or for that matter, Ola, but they could have presented a very persuasive, condensed piece of paper that shows the challenges and how to get out of that challenges. And we don't see that in the documentation that they submitted.
Thank you. I think what we can agree on is there are multi-layered factors in all this, who is siding with who, all that, and when. Actually, the document interestingly classified the European countries into 4, and my attention was attracted by this Denmark and Sweden, where according to the strategy or the document, we're shifting between yes for sanction and no sanctions depending on when, and so on. Of course, Russia, Turkey, they are praised for standing and helping Ethiopia in that document. Professor Scale, I think you were mentioning about the national dialogue and so on. Again, in that document, 15 times the word dialogue is mentioned, and we are in a week where the House of Representatives disclosed the names of the people who join or nominated for the national dialogue. So you can give us a picture of the bigger picture of state of the foreign affairs and where we are now in terms of that strategy.
All right. I guess we are basically what we're doing here is looking at the leaked document and assess the document rather than the ledger of success and failures by the Ethiopian government, because even the document that is written by the Ethiopian government doesn't say that. It doesn't even claim that they have made progress in any area. It's a re-engagement strategy. It's something that they are intending to do, unless they are intentionally leaking it to us to misinform and disinform. So based on the document, simply based on the document, not any extraneous issues, I still think that it is not written by professionals who understand geopolitics and the conduct of foreign policy. The deeper issue, I'll come to it, but I don't think that it was written by the professionals, the advisors to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. This is something written in the Prime Minister's office entirely. But when I say delusional, what I mean is that, look, it is what they're saying. Our diplomacy is not working, which is that they're recognizing the fact it wasn't working for them for a long time. That's why they have sanctions imposed on the Ethiopian officials, and expulsion from AGOA, and threatening more sanctions against Ethiopia. There are some shifts in terms of policies of the European Union and the American government, but that's absolutely nothing to do with what the Ethiopian government was able to do to try to lobby them. The shifts occurred as a result of something else, but I'm not going to go into that. But judging by what is written in the text, it is still denial. It's still delusional when the document says this strategy takes into account the context and the course of the war. Where did you see that? They're still saying the cause of the war is the Northern Command. The course of the war, the context, as they're saying, it is about law enforcement. The course of the war, they're still saying we withdrew from Tigray, which is not true, which is absolutely not true. They did not give Tigray a chance for peace. They did not give a chance for Tigray farmers to plant. That's not why they left. They were kicked out of Tigray because they were defeated. So if you do not understand that, I could consider still delusional. When they say the national security interest of Ethiopia, that they are considering the national security and interest of Ethiopia, and this is the point that I will come to, Ethiopia doesn't have a national security policy right now. It doesn't, but I'll come to that point as well. So when they say that they've taken into account the current political alignment in the country, the international political alignment in the country, well, if they did understand that, they're not delusional, so they have now sided with who? With, unashamedly, they're taking a position with Belarus. Belarus supported them. North Korea supported them. China supported them. Russia supported them. Turkey supported them. Iran supported them. That's what they are saying in this document. It didn't require any work to have these countries to support them. I don't think it requires any work for China to support Ethiopia in this venture. But they're saying they're taking national security or the international alignment in which Israel and Iran are aligned with Ethiopia. Doesn't make any sense. Absolutely doesn't make sense any from geopolitical perspective. And it is when it says that the mutual principles of mutual interest. What is that the principle of mutual interest that is governing their behavior towards Djibouti? When they made peace with Eritrea, Djibouti should have been informed. They haven't. When they made with Eritrea, they should have informed Sudan. They haven't. Not Kenya. They have dismantled the architecture of stability and peace in the Horn of Africa. And what principles of mutual interest are they talking about? IGAD is completely fallen into disuse today. What mutual interest are the principles of mutual interest did they follow? This is not a document, a foreign policy document. It was not even written by foreign policy professionals. You know, for me, the definition of delusion is it's when you favor appearance over reality. They are not tied to reality. That's all I'm saying. That when public relations, all they are saying is what happened in Tigray and all over Ethiopia did not happen. It is that the West was misinformed. It was misinformed, and they're accusing us. When they say that the Tigray war is akin or equal to the Adwa victory, it's a victory for all of Africans, and that's why Africans are with us in Pan-Africanist spirit. What more can you say if that's not delusion, for God's sakes? And so this is what it is. But anyways, what is that it is pointing out to? What it is pointing out to is what I said earlier, that Ethiopia had some respectable foreign policy approaches in its history. Even under the EPRDF, there was the 2002 white paper, which is entitled Foreign Affairs and National Security Policy and Strategy, which stipulated at the time in 2002 that Ethiopia's foreign policy and security policy should be centered around development. and that for development that benefits the people, and creating conducive conditions for development and peace. That was the core of it. As far as Ethiopia's national interest, the definition of national security and national interest is concerned, the country's main security threat at the time, they defined it as the danger posed by widening and deepening poverty that they thought would lead to the failure of democratization, and poverty may lead to state collapse and instability in the region. So we have to focus internally by resolving our problems, and our foreign policy should be geared toward advancing facing the challenges of internal difficulties. And in their approach to foreign policy, you can see that document. It has this concentric circle. It begins with neighbors. It begins with peaceful coexistence with neighbors, with Djibouti, with Kenya, with Sudan, with the exception of Kenya, with the exception of Eritrea. That peace, the approach of there is peace must be with neighbors around the country. And then it expands to the Middle East, and then to the European Union, and then to America, far-flung places. That is the approach. But it starts in the region. IGAD was functional at the time. The Nile Basin Initiative was functional. That the approach of foreign policy was institutional at the time. It isn't right now. There is no foreign policy. Look, 2002 is 20 years ago. That's when Ethiopia had a foreign policy that guides the action of diplomats and embassies around the world. 2002. 20 years later, Ethiopia doesn't have a foreign policy, national security policy, and strategy. It just doesn't. What you see with this document is the absence of approach, the absence of foreign policy that guides actions, policies, and behaviors. That doesn't exist. There was institutional autonomy. Everything was done institutionally at the time, with the foreign ministry being the main functionary in formulating and implementing policies. It is not right now. Foreign policy is controlled by the Prime Minister's office. For God's sakes, the people that were advising this Prime Minister were like this guy who was unemployed here in Minnesota, who went by and now is an ambassador to Saudi Arabia, had not done anything to study foreign policy, for national security studies, had done absolutely nothing, but that was a foreign policy advisor to the Prime Minister. That's what I called infantile approach. What should worry Ethiopians and the rest of the world is that this is not a foreign policy document. There have been calls to overhaul this since 2002, because the thinking about national security in Ethiopia has shifted. And of course, the transition from authoritarian, or the attempted transition from authoritarian rule to democracy, should have necessitated a re-evaluation and overhauling of the policy. That didn't happen. So what you see, the adhocracy that you see in this document, the incoherence that you see in this document, the infantile approach that you see in this document is a reflection that Ethiopia does not have a foreign policy, has no approach to it, no institutional autonomy to it. The definition of foreign policy today is the collapse of it in Ethiopia. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Actually, about how the Prime Minister's office, and specifically the Prime Minister, hijacked everything that's happening in the Foreign Office. Asafa Nuguse, a former diplomat who defected to the US, was in public media mentioning that how even sometimes as a success story, the Prime Minister was telling them, I didn't tell you what I was doing with Somaliland or with this because I don't want you to intervene, or hinder my success. So he is just bypassing any formal institutional channels. Yosef, you wanna maybe this is before our final words. You can also connect with your final word for the day on the document. You are muted again. Let me just.
not my final words. First, let me respond. Think about this. The world has given Ethiopia a huge margin of error to work with. It's a huge margin of error. It has allowed Ethiopia a huge margin of error within which it has to work. Now, all of the excesses that we have been calling fall within that margin of error. We might call it foolish, stupid, arrogant, whatever it is, but it still falls within that margin of error that the world has allowed it. Now, if you get that point, then it means that whatever they have been doing is they have been conscious of the parameters of that margin of error. For example, when we talk about let's say the things that they have been getting away with, I was primarily concerned about those because all of those things that they have been getting away with was by doing the excesses that we have been calling as foolish or whatever it is. Think about the appearance, the appearance over the reality. When I'm talking about the delusion between appearance and reality, a delusional person believes in that appearance. But in the case of Ethiopia, the diplomats or whoever they are, for example, when they let's take an example. The example is, think about the joint commission that was with Ethiopia and the UN Human Rights Commission. Do you think that the Ethiopians believed when they formed that commission that they would do the right thing? No. None of them, even the ones that were working within the Human Rights Commission, let alone the government of Ethiopia, believed that that commission would do the right thing. What they were doing was they were giving an appearance of an organization that would do the right thing to the world, so that the world could say, okay, they are doing the right thing. Within what? Within that huge margin of error it has allowed them. For example, when the United Nations chief collaborates with them or blesses this joint commission, then they are successful in what they have been doing. So every appearance that came from Ethiopia, for example, the appearance of providing humanitarian aid to Tigray, either in a small amount or coming up with some kind of reasons, they don't believe in that appearance. They are not ready to provide Tigray with humanitarian assistance, but they will give that appearance to the world. These people are not delusional. They don't believe in the appearance that they are doing. Every step that they have taken, they don't believe it themselves, but they believe that the world will go along with that appearance. The question that we have to ask is, why did the world give them that kind of huge latitude to do whatever they wanted to do? That is a question that we should ask. And probably there is many reasons, but one of the reasons that I believe is, especially when it comes to Europe, is the politics of numbers. The politics of numbers, they have been effectively using, Ethiopia have been effectively using the politics of numbers. 110 million versus 6 million. Now, what Abiy cleverly did was to come with an either or format, with an either us or them. No compromise in between, no middle in between. Either you have to side with 110 million or you will have to side with 6 million. The Europeans eventually, it seemed that they have chosen to side with the 110 million. Why? Market is one of the reasons. Another, the stability, the unity and stability of Ethiopia and whatever consequences that may bear. Another one is a migration problem. So they understand each other in the way that they are doing. but he has cleverly framed it as an either or phenomena. That's one of the reasons. I'm just mentioning one of the reasons. But on the Ethiopian side, there is no delusion in what they are doing. They know where they have failed. For example, when they talk about the command center, for example, the attack on the command center, do you think the ones that have been preparing the war for 2 or 3 years, they believe that story? No. But they are trying to sell that story to the outside world, which to some extent they have succeeded, but they don't believe in that story themselves. These are not delusional people. They know exactly what they are doing. So what I am saying is, in every case that Ethiopia has done so far in its foreign policy, it has been providing this formula. And that is where even in the document says, let's do exactly what the world is expected us to do, but only in its appearance form. And I am not denying all the other failures that Professor Hitzkiel and Faisal mentioned in regard to the foreign policy of Ethiopia. What I am saying is that when it comes to the main goal of Ethiopia, which is that to carry on the genocidal war against Tigray until it reaches its final solution, then every step that they have made has been successful so far. Not because they are delusional, but because they know exactly what they are doing, and they know exactly what probably in most of the cases how the world would respond to that. Thank you.
Yeah, if I add before we go to our final Getachew.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, I think people who are around Abiy, you could see the softening position of the West vis-a-vis Ethiopia as a success. And I'm not saying entirely Yosef is wrong on this one. I think Yosef is giving a bit of a credit that the Abiy team at this particular time probably doesn't deserve it. And here is my argument, Yosef. During the EPRDF, about 50,000 Somalis are believed to have been bombarded and killed in Mogadishu when Ethiopia invaded Somalia with a tacit agreement of the West. 50,000 civilians. Here is a country that invaded the capital city of a nation, and literally about 50,000 people are believed. Between 2007 and 2012, unaccounted Somalis have died. For 2 years, the so-called Ogaden region was under blockade. You have not heard a single Western nation picking up its finger or its media. You cannot say that the Ethiopian government at that time was so skillful that they completely pacified the West. No, we are struggling against a huge false narrative of historical record about Ethiopia. Those of us who have been struggling to level the grounds and bring some sort of equity throughout Ethiopia, whether that's in Tigray, in Eritrea before 1994, in Oromia, we have an established mythology that the West have absorbed so deep that every time Ethiopia is wrong or massacring or carrying genocide, no matter who the person at Eretz Kilo is, the West gives latitude to Eretz Kilo. So when I look at what people like Abiy did and the little respite that they got today, and I read the report that they have written, I'm not attributing what they have done and their lobbying, as Scale was saying, as the factor that brought the success. I think the big picture, you said that in a different way, the 110 million mystique of Ethiopia vis-a-vis 6 million starving, quote-unquote, rebellious ethnic group led by a group, quote-unquote, that does not want to work with a big state. the Oromo region, whose Ola has been, already labeled before they even amassed 50,000 troops as a terrorist, and build that through the UN on all the embassies that you have. The whole mystic that Ethiopia has with the false narrative of being Africa's liberator, when it's the only country on earth that is an African and a colonial power. We have all these things that work in favor of Ethiopia. So, yes, in the last 2-3 months, Abiy's government has gotten a window to breathe. But I'm not saying that window came as a result of their skills or their ability or their understanding of the diplomatic world. I think there have been some circumstances, the rivalry between the West and the East now, which served Ethiopia, the debt that China wants to preserve, and the fact that it already invested in the Ogaden oil, the fact that Russia wanted to make sure that America fails in the Horn of Africa and in Ethiopia, all those things worked on in favor of Abiy's team. But the way they have been managing the diplomacy for the last few years, including sometimes biting the hand that feeds, I really didn't see a skill that I can say they did a good thing. But what I see, and I agree with you 100%, is that the heavyweight of the name Ethiopia, the false narrative that has sustained Ethiopia all this time, the very fact that the very African black person who hates colonialism and slavery sort of rejoices at Ethiopia without regard to what it has done to the Somalis, the Oromos, the Kampatas, the Hadiyas, and now the Tigres. All those are myths established for Ethiopia, and it takes to the bank. And this time, it really took that check to the bank.
Yeah, I think as we speak, the African Union is after 2 years of absence because of COVID, is back in Addis for its summit, and Ethiopia is making a big case out of that. Maybe final word, Professor Ezekiel?
All right. I guess in a word, in our discussion of Ethiopian foreign policy, the state of Ethiopian foreign policy, but the leaked document actually speaks to larger problems in Ethiopia. It is a case of demonstration. What it shows is the collapse of institutions. This time, a foreign policy, or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, is not in charge of Ethiopia's foreign policy. That we have been seeing, like you said earlier, on the peace process with Eritrea. Very difficult to say that, but the engagement with Eritrea, the foreign ministry was not involved in it. So the failure or the collapse of institutional governance, failure of institutions, is what you see in the case of foreign policy. But the same applies to all sectors of governance: security, military, economy, the governance of all of these institutions, because decision-making is centralized in the Prime Minister's office, and the Prime Minister's office is an arena of incompetence of this world. That's what it shows. The collapse of institutional decision-making, its concentration in simply for the sake of a person who loves to make decisions, to remain a dictator, just for him, and not capable of actually making informed decision. That's what it shows. Now, this government still brands itself as a reformist. It had 3 years to show that it is a reformist government. It is demonstrably retrograde. The ad hoc approach that we see here, the ad hoc approach to the issues of war and peace, the exercise of sovereign power that decides who lives and who dies, that kind of governance has resulted in nothing but destruction, loss of life, limbs, and property in all over Ethiopia, more so in Tigray. It has resulted, the neglect of agriculture and everything has resulted in famine, food security, displacement, and dislocation. That's the record of this government. The government has no qualms today standing alongside. It seems that in this document that this government is so proud to stand alongside African dictators, and I'm not going to list the names. They're all dictators. Asian dictators, China, North Korea, no qualms whatsoever. European dictators, Belarus, Russia, Turkey, Middle Eastern autocrats, UAE, Saudi Arabia. That's what this government has done. This is what it is. Now, with this record, with this kind of record, what kind of government survives anywhere in the world? I don't know if only the dictators could, but even then they have to be a little magnanimous. They're a little bit benevolent. This is the record of this government, and this document simply shows us the extent and the magnitude of failure in that country. We talked about state collapse the other day. This was a document that shows actually state collapse in that country.
Great, thank you, Professor Skel. Yosef, your final word for today?
All right, okay. First of all, let me make it clear that I'm not blaming either TPLF or TDF or OLA for not being, diplomatic enough. I know exactly where they are. And to make it clear, I'm not condoning while I'm mentioning how the Abiy government has done its diplomatic feats. I'm not condoning any of those feats. I am against it in every way possible. Okay, having said that, we have to know that dictators, and for all practical purpose, Abiy Ahmed is a dictator right now. With dictatorship, always institutional death follows with dictatorship. For example, when Hizkiel mentioned this, when Professor Hizkiel mentioned this, the fact that the foreign policy part was not involved in the peacemaking process with Eritrea at the beginning. Why would it happen if you are preparing for war? Why would you want to invade an institution in order to? It would be against your plan in general. So we have to look at it in a different way. That's what I'm calling. I understand the failures of foreign policy in Ethiopia in general. What I'm focusing is on this one in particular. In fact, those failures in general are probably sacrificed precisely because they need to focus on this one. Anyway, let me close it with one thing. In the next weeks, one of the things that were mentioned at the beginning was that whether the Tigray crisis is ending with negotiation or not. I mentioned then that I'm not sure. In the meantime, we are seeing that time is working against Tigray. As always, I mentioned the time factor. Time is working against Tigray right now. If this process is stretched for days to come, let's say, for weeks and months, which most probably is, without the humanitarian aid getting into Tigray, then we have two possibilities. One, only the enemy will get any profit out of it. One, the enemy is going to reorganize itself. We already know that there are many training camps in Ethiopia right now, busy. As I mentioned before, Eritrea has opened 2 training camps in Afar and another 3 training camps in Amhara. So time would only work for the enemies. Another one is, of course, the humanitarian crisis in Tigray. Already thousands of people are dying. If this thing is going to stretch for months to come, or at least weeks to come, then we'll see tens of thousands of people dying in Tigray. That's why I said before that it's not only up to Ethiopia to begin the war. All that Ethiopia has to do is make it impossible for Tigray to exist under present conditions, with famine and with a lack of medicine and famine doing the job it wants to be done. That is the genocide. If that continues, then it will be up to Tigray to start the war, to get out of this siege, out of this encirclement. So I think it would be wise to watch the next few weeks, to see where Tigray is heading. Another thing is probably the Eritrean case. Eritrea is becoming highly agitated at this time. It's getting involved in the, as I said, in many ways, along the border, in Western Tigray, in the Abala area, in the Afar, and in the training camps. Now, why is Eritrea doing this? Is also another question. Where will it go? Where will it go? Because Eritrea will only stop if the war gets into its territory. That's the only way it would stop. And is Tigray able to do that? Would it try to do that? These are the questions that I'm asking myself in the coming weeks. Thank you.
These are also questions that we'll be following closely, and they might show up again in our H panel. Faisal, your final word for today.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I know Yosef is not really condoning Abiy's dictatorial. I think he's touching sore points that are needed to really touched. And I completely agree with him that TDF or Tigray really needs a new strategy. I totally agree with him, and I said this before. To expect a resolution from Abiy, given what he's doing, is just a pipe dream. I mean, he will try slowly but surely to suffocate and kill, if possible, not only the resistance but also anybody who can die, as long as that thing is something that gives him the power. And I don't see, given everything, and you just posted a minute ago the commission that he's establishing, given the way this commission is even being established, Abiy government is not ready for mediation or reconciliation or peaceful resolution to the conflict. And totally agree with you, Joseph, that he is buying a time. He's reestablishing his capacity to take one more offense. And I don't think it's in the cards for Abiy from what we see. Something may be in the background, like the Kenyan talks, which we are not privy to and we cannot comment. But from what we see at the outset, Abiy is not speaking about peace. And as of today, we read and learned that three major opposition groups, two Oromo groups, OFC and OLF, and Somali group over the National Liberation Front, did not participate in the election, nor they blessed this ongoing so-called mediation or mikikir, which is what consultation. That's what the word translates. And consultation is different than peacemaking and, if you will, reconciliation and all that. So I think the message is very clear from Abiy's side. We'll try to suffocate Tigray and slowly kill to the extent possible. And if that's not enough, he will reassemble his army to come back to hit them hard. I think what is and I think Scale touched it, what we have learned from this round of Abiy is, if you will, coming back to life as he thinks, coming back to life is one thing that we learn, and that is how Ethiopian leadership never learns from the past that they have seen. This time, Abiy should have done what they call in this country an autopsy of what had happened, a dissection of the challenges and the problems. And the challenges and the problems that we have seen is beyond the Tigray war. It's the questions of nationalities, it's the question of Oromo, it's the question of Somali. He completely put the challenges aside and just said there was a war with Tigray, and the only way we can finish that war is completely to destroy. And that autopsy that he should have done is not done. I think where we are today, I am not really optimistic that anything would come out from this war and the lessons learned. I think what Abiy and team would like to do is to probably create any theater, first being this commission, to really put a cold blanket on everything that happened, move on, say the 5 years that he has quote unquote won by 94% of the electorate, legitimize his government, shut off Ola and TDF, and basically continue a war of attrition until he feels he can probably suffocate TDF and Ola. And with today's really remarks that we all presented, Ethiopia is in a precarious position today than it was a few months ago. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for the insightful. Our viewers were following closely and commenting a lot on the insights that were given. And I was showing this list. So this is the 42. There is a redundancy somewhere, but 41 to 42 people that are nominated out of 632 by the for the Dialogue Commission, National Dialogue Commission. So we can say that the major parties, the OLF, the Oromo Liberation Front, and the ONLF, that is the Ogaden National Liberation Front, and the OFC, that is the another major actor in the Oromia region.
I'm trying to find Harmela representing Tigray Tunisia. I couldn't find her.
So actually there is another one here there, and so people are the major actors. I just want to show from our last week's panel, we used the what could be categorized as pro-PP. They are very close to the Prosperity Party. This one is what we showed last week. So you have under at the bottom OLF, OFC, ONLF. These are the three major that would be on the other side of the table from PP. I would say objecting these commissioners that are nominated.
Getachew, it's very interesting that this bottom group are the ones who really challenged the previous government through armed struggle in a way, and for the last 40 years they have been in the theater for having questions that they struggled, and for them to stay away and then still expect to have national dialogue with people who just stayed in towns and cities, and is just another sad commentary of what's happening.
And to the point of, I think was it Joseph or Faisal made, that Germany and France see no problem with this, and they are jumping on that wagon. So I think this is an interesting topic we will be hopefully exploring in the coming weeks. But for today, I really thank you for your insight and for your time, and good night from here. You have been following us live on Facebook and YouTube with today's weekly Edge panel. The topic for today was Ethiopia's state of foreign affairs through Abiy Ahmed's lens. And we started with looking at the leaked document on re-engaging strategy. That's a foreign relations strategy that was officially from the Minister of Foreign Affairs, specifically from the advisor to the Minister's office. And before I sign off, tomorrow ساعات 12 PM Eastern Time ትግራይ ኣበያላ ላበይ ብኸመይ ትኽድ ዝብል ምስ መርሲኤ ኪዳን ዶክተር ገብረ ሚካኤል ገብረ መስቀል ሃይሉ ከበደ ካብ ሳልሳይ ወያነ ክብሮም ዘቢብ ወይም በርሀ ካብ ባይቶና ክንዘራረብ ኢና. And we have the twice a week a new segment that is the UMD Media News Update in English and UMD Media Zena in Amharic by journalist Shmalis Marasa Gabra Mikael. So tune in for that live update at 9 PM Eastern Time tomorrow. And that is the show for today. Thank you for following us, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye from here.